Welcome back. I hope that sandwich is tasting nice. Save a little bit for me for later on, will you please? We are back now. We're going to delve into the world of the defined benefits pension landscape. We've had the wider regulatory scene set for us by Steve Webb and John Lawson. I'm delighted to be joined by Tim Rees from Scottish Widows and Peter Bradshaw from Selectapension. Gents, we've got another question in from that youngster that was on earlier, Ken Davey. He's asked, in light of pensions freedom, how do you see it panning out in the case of pension transfers from defined benefit schemes? He says, it seems to a lot of us that this is fraught with risks, and we can see 5 or 10 years' time a lot of claims coming because people have transferred, taken advantage of pensions freedom, been very confident they were going to take the money out, but when they run out of money, they'll look back and feel they've done the wrong thing. How can advisors safeguard against this, and is it the right thing for them to be doing anyway?
Yeah, I mean, great question, and a number of different facets within it. I think the key becomes, what is the process for giving the advice? And within the advice from there, that needs to be something that is broad-ranging. So therefore you would have, what initiates it? Is it the customer coming to the advisor, or the advisor going to the customer? And I think there's a very, very different piece within that, because I think the only time when there is a more danger for the advisor than other times is where it's being very much customer-led. And almost the advisor then is maybe not looking at it in the round. Because within the process that will be given, there is a number of pieces that is about putting the advisor in a position whereby they can advise the customer in the broadest sense. So therefore it is about what are you leaving behind, what are you moving to, what is the risks associated with that in the immediacy, but then also what is it further down the line. And it's about keeping that very much so that the customer is in a position whereby they're very, very informed as to what they're going to. That it's properly documented from there so the customer's got that level of understanding, and that is documented. That is, follow the process and documenting it properly should be the safeguard. But there's always the pieces around the corner that you don't know of, and it's based on the legislation and the customer's circumstances at that point in time.
What's best practice for an advisor to safeguard against this?
Well, best practice is to look around and get as much support as you possibly can. I think the thing is obviously know your customer, but if we go back to the pensions freedoms, I think DB was an unintended consequence of that. I think the demand has been enormous. We know that from our own particular tool on the DB side. We've seen advisors running 40,000 cases in the last 12 months, which is actually twice what it was before in the previous 12 months. So again, I think the demand has been almost sprung upon people, because obviously pensions freedoms was all about DC. DB I don't think at the time was particularly thought of, but now you're getting people recognising that obviously the old DB was all about you were going to work for your entire life with a company, you get defined benefit, but the defined benefit was what you were told you're going to get. And as I say, I think for the people in the DB market, it's basically opened up their minds to the fact that they don't need to just stick with the defined benefit. And again, the defined benefit is a pool. It's a risk pool, isn't it? That you bring different things to it. Whereas I think it's more about ownership. But I say to specifically answer the question, a lot of people are looking to get qualifications to write this sort of business. I think their business models are changing to react to that. If you consider that there's just under 4 million people with defined benefit arrangements that they've worked for an employer, they don't work for them now, then most advisors will have clients in that area. And we know from the cases run by the Bureau that advisors' business models are changing. Instead of accommodating 1 or 2 occasionally, we're finding that now that's almost the business model. And we know, for instance, within the SimplyBiz membership, there are now 344 firms that are referring business to the Bureau. So again, the support is all about education, it's about training, it's about referring cases to specialists if you actually don't feel inclined yourself. And I think the biggest issues for advisors, probably a number of them, first is time. These things take a huge amount of time. From the Bureau perspective, we've managed to get it down to about 18 weeks, and it is managing people's expectations. So time is a big thing. Do you put the time into doing that as opposed to something else? Another issue is what sort of support would you have technologically? I know providers have come into the realm now to offer services, but obviously the inclination there is perhaps they're a bit restricted in terms of where the money's actually going to go to. So again, some in terms of the business models are referring it to specialist financial advisors, or you can refer cases to a specialist bureau. But the important thing is, again, to answer the question, some way down the line, you're going to be accountable for the advice. And the point about using a robust system which looks at the entire market and actually archives everything, provides an audit trail, and again, if the regulator compliance department comes to call, you've actually got evidence of that research to sort of cover yourself.
My new best mate, Jane Hodges, is back, and Jane and I like that at the moment in terms of the questions. She wants to pick up on a point you raised at the very outset there. Surely the bigger risk is firms going after and tactically marketing people to transfer their pension. And surely, if it's customer driven, it's likely to be more about what they really want.
There's a fair point within that it should be driven by the advisor, from the advisor looking for it. But effectively, from a customer perspective, it's really looking around and saying, okay, yeah, if they are insistent, effectively, they say, no, I want to do it. That's often the position, because they've been blinded almost by the size of the transfer value, not about what the benefits are that sit behind that, and what the risks are associated with it within the overall auspices of the financial plan that we'd hope that they would have.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's about, don't let the tail wag the dog in here. Yeah, what is happening now is that people are asking more for the transfer values, and then they get dazzled by it.
But to add to that as well, obviously with the publicity around BHS, Tata Steel, etc., people are genuinely concerned that there isn't going to be a pension at the end of the day for them. I know we have the pension protection fund as such, but I think that has highlighted the sort of demand to at least have it reviewed, if not particularly moved.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's entering into it from the advisor's perspective of, I'm going to give you advice about what to do. So it's about defined benefit scheme advice rather than transfer advice, being the first point. So effectively, so that get the relationship right between the customer and the advisor, that what they're going to be doing is actually viewing their pension benefits and their plans within which defined benefits will be part of it.
Interesting semantic point. If you're coming at it from the point of view of its transfer advice, you kind of prejudged what's
absolutely,
going to happen.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Janice Russell's been in touch. She's no relation, well, not that I know of, Janice. Given the growing suitability for recommendations of blended solutions within the pension market, and for pension transfers in at-retirement solutions, do you know of any policy change to impose the idea that DB schemes should permit split transfers, e.g. a portion to a drawdown plan, portion to annuity?
They're not actually allowed to do partial encashments, but I think the point is that if a member insists, I think the trustees have got some discretion on whether they could do that, in which case there may be a benefit that could be retained in the scheme. There may be something that you could actually move out into the drawdown will. So whilst that's generally not permissible, I think it's possible.
It would be quite difficult there for the trustees not to be moving into the space of almost giving advice by way of stepping in the way.
Because I think the point is, obviously, by paying enhanced transfer values, a lot of the employers and the trustees would, in some respects, want to get rid of some of the liabilities by getting people to leave. So they should, in theory, be accommodating, shouldn't they?
And in that circumstance, you'd almost say, well, if they're trying to get rid of the liability, what really sits behind that? It must be something I'm giving up that's really well worth it. And certainly with the longevity and the such like of people, then that becomes one of the big risks for the trustees.
It's reported recently that the number of DB schemes that are in crisis surpasses 1,000. Is there anything being done out there from a regulatory stance to ensure that business owners are not just abandoning schemes when looking to sell?
Not that I'm aware of. But
no, I'm not. I mean, obviously the BHS piece is probably the highest profile by way of what the situation was on the scheme, but effectively it would be all reasonable steps being taken by the employer and the trustees to manage this scheme and its liabilities. And then, of course, as you just said, is that the PPF is there as a fallback. So I'm not aware of any that's actually putting that into place now. Okay.
What are you seeing in terms of best practice out there for advisors dealing with insistent clients? And that it may come to the point where, as we talked earlier about, is it transfer advice or is it advice? If your advice is not to do this, yet the customer is insistent, what's the best practice, do you feel, from an advisory point of view to make sure that, okay, on the one hand, do I facilitate this? Do I walk away? Is there and does the point at which you charge for advice come into play here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting situation where you've got that insistent client. I think one of the pieces is from a good practice would be to make sure that you first off you are charging for the advice you are giving in the broadest aspect. So therefore that's about giving the advice. That is completely therefore detached from the transaction. And I don't think there is a best practice. I think it will be down to the individuals and their firms making a decision as far as if I'm recommending not to transfer and I've documented that clearly to the customer and the customer wants to do it. Ultimately for me is why wouldn't you walk away? Yeah. And that would almost be the way in which, a number of advisors I've spoken to, that's what they've said they're doing because they've given the advice, the customer is then going against it. And there are ways in which they can go to providers and do execution only, the customers themselves. Well, if they are that insistent, that's what they would go and do. But what they will have is the report back from the original advisor that says, my recommendation is to you not to transfer. So therefore it's, that's the clearest way for managing a business and the risk within it. But I would say that they would go down. Don't know if you
and I mean, again, I'm not a financial advisor, but I think the point is that regardless to how the transfer actually pans out, it's important, again, looking sort of backwards from the future, that it's actually documented ideally in the client's own handwriting for exactly why they want to do the transfer, just to make that point. Okay.
What's the future direction of travel in this marketplace? Is it one that's only going to grow and continue to cause headlines, do we feel?
I think it's going to continue to grow. Undoubtedly, there's nearly 4 million people, as I mentioned before, who've got these arrangements. And again, there's a demand, there's no question about that, for the advice side. In terms of the bureau that we run, the specialist unit, we processed over 2,000 cases since April 2015. And I can see that continuing, I really do.
Yeah, I'd see it the same. I think the only piece that would change the volumes may well be what happens with the relative conversion rates of the benefit to the transfer value. But I'd say that actually people who are going down that route are the ones who are chasing the transfer value that looks to be a big fund, the customers. This is about actually what is your relative return you need to get. And from there, I mean, sad of dinner parties I go to, but there's never before been as much talk about transfer values in DB schemes and what is the future for them, what does it mean, what's the flexibility it gives. And it's helped to bring pensions to the forefront, even more so on DB schemes that would maybe, it was very much, it was passive in the past, whereas now it's actually proactive. So the discussion that then leads to this whole point, you need to take the advice. We have to, effectively, but effectively make sure you look at it and look at it again, I'd say, repeating my point, in the round by way of what percentage of your overall retirement planning does that DB benefit represent? What is your attitude to risk? What is your capacity for loss? And what does your income in retirement look like?
Okay. Well, I've got a question here that asks basically, for those who are seeking advice, what are the key things that the consumer should be looking out for? And I guess this kind of boils down to your point there, what is it that they should be considering as the main issues, and therefore what within the work that you would do within a transfer bureau, what are the key issues that are assessed, what are the key stages that people are going through?
Yeah, I mean, I think the piece for me would be about, again, starting not from the point of view what is your transfer value to your TVAS, but bring it back to almost it's the opening question with the customer if they're coming to the advisor. So can you talk to me about what is your understanding about your DB benefit? What is leading you to actually look to review this at this point in time? What particularly what is the attraction of it for you? Therefore, you can look into what is it about. Is it about tax-free cash? Is it about accessibility earlier? Is it about flexibility of income? Is it about inheritability? Effectively passing down the next generations? What are those things? I think if you can get that initial point with the customer, whereby the customer could say, actually, this is why I've come. And more often than not, it's going to be because they've been talking to a friend, maybe at a dinner party, who's done the transfer. But this is about, what are your circumstances, what is your situation?
We are seeing more and more people taking ownership, aren't we? I mean, the point about the freedoms was instead of sleepwalking into annuity, then you had to make some decisions yourself. You had to perhaps understand some of the implications of the return investment sometime in the future. So again, I can see more people taking more ownership and saying, again, instead of saying, well, I'm getting what I'm entitled to and somebody else is determining that for me from the pool, that's a DB, then I'm actually going to take ownership. And to echo your point, I think it's all about knowing your client thoroughly, understanding their attitude to risk. But again, for the selective memory that some people have, some way down the line, document it,
absolutely,
evidence it.
Talk me through the what happens then if I'm an advisor and I decide, you know what, this isn't for me, but I do have clients in this circumstance, and I in fact want to outsource the delivery. What's my client engagement, and how does that process work?
Okay. Well, firstly, you need to prime the client that for this particular piece of advice, you're subcontracting almost or referring it to a specialist unit.
Yep.
So there's a client agreement, there's an introducer agreement, and then basically they get in touch with the bureau. The bureau then deals directly with the client. There's obviously the fact-finding process, understanding the client, etc. The bureau will do the report, provide recommendations. They have the PI cover, and again, if the transfer is to go ahead, then the bureau will execute that, and then at that stage they'll pass it back to the introducing advisor. So the point is, the advisor, by referring cases, there's no risk of poaching because that's all the bureau does, that specific piece of work. But equally, it's worth noting that the bureau won't take instruction about where the money's going. It'll try and take account of that if that's useful, and equally in terms of any products it's going to, there won't be any trail because that's a servicing arrangement to pay for the trail. And basically, once the case is transferred or executed or closed or whatever the outcome is, then it's handed back, and that's the end of it.
Okay. So and weigh up for me then the distinction between taking that on myself. I'm in the advisory firm. I've decided, you know what, actually, that all sounds eminently achievable. I'm going to enter this market myself. What are the key things I need to be considering if I'm in this?
Well, first of all, you need to be qualified, as you know. But but assuming you are, it's the question of actually, in some cases, dealing with trustees that can take a long, long time. If you go to a specialist bureau, then they're used to using the particular bits of kit as far as that goes. I mean, there's no reason why you should necessarily refer it, but it may serve you in terms of saving time, having an expertise within that particular area. If you're not regularly involved in that, you might actually find quite time-consuming, chasing trustees because they can take a while. The other thing is that when you're actually dealing with the trustees, some of the historic rules of the scheme could be a bit misleading. I mean, within the bureau, we had a particular scheme and had 3 different people look at this particular rule and come up with 3 different interpretations. Also, some of the trustees there probably weren't born when the schemes were put in place. So it's time-consuming, time-saving. It's, I suppose, specialist, and you are actually removing the risk for that particular piece of business from your book, which I think is a very valid point.
Tim, I asked Steve Webb and John Lawson earlier if they could have waved their magic wand from inside their think tank rooms at Aviva and at Royal London, what they would come up with for the pensions market, and around this defined benefits area. What do you think is the future?
I think I'd echo what John said was around the fact that it is about what you can do with your benefit when it's in payment. And that it's about what you can do by way of structuring the funds and structuring the types of ways in which you can draw your income and the ways in which you can actually set up beforehand that says your cash flow modelling forecast will show you what's actually going to happen to your fund. And I think the piece is about its education within that circumstance that says if you do a transfer or you have a transfer done for you and it goes into a personal pension and the customer is then taking drawdown, that isn't a relationship for that transaction. It is potentially into the 80s and 90s now. And so therefore it is about a way in which it can be really efficient to do that. But most importantly is about educating the customers so that they actually understand what they're moving into, and there's tools that can help them construct what does the future look like, the what-if scenarios. Guy
Skinner's fired an arrow in at the very end here for us as a question. To what extent will pension trustees be able to move away from using gilts as the method of investing to support DB schemes? And do you think this could change the dynamic of high cash equivalent transfer values?
Not being an investment expert, I'm not sure what the alternatives to gilts would be. I mean, that's always been the case, is it not?
It has. We heard earlier on, I guess if I'll bring you back to the market update that we had earlier, where people are looking at the extent of the duration of gilts, the potential capital volatility and the changing correlation of that asset class. Essentially, Another way of looking at it is, are the cash equivalent transfer values inside these DB schemes artificially high?
They do vary. It is a reflection of the gilt need, isn't it? I suppose the only other way to do it is to get maybe some foreign money and hedge against some of the risks and liabilities in the future. But
it's broadening the risk, really, isn't it? And I think that is the thing. The interesting piece comes if you look at the reports that go through, where you've got fairly similar schemes, you do get massive differences in what is the critical yield. And so therefore there is some flexibility in there for trustees and how they would deal with it.
Yeah.
As to whether there'd be any legislation come in and say, okay, yeah, you need to go to a mix of gilts and something else, I don't think that, who would actually enforce that, make sure that would happen. But equally from there, I think it's not about, okay, well, if the transfer value is going to reduce, we need to give you advice now. Because remember, what we said earlier was the fact that it's not about the transfer value, it's what the matching rate is. And look at everything in the round. So therefore it shouldn't be oh no, we need to do a transfer in now, and educate customers that actually let's look at it based on what evidence we have now and what your plans are for the future.
Okay. Coming up, ladies and gents, we have got the Head of Business Consultancy at SimplyBiz Investment Services to talk all about using technology in the advisory business, and he's going to be joined by Martin Coyle from Aegon and Gavin Jobson Wood, and we're going to get stuck into all aspects of platforms, technology and the advice process. That'll be in about 5 minutes. You stay exactly where you are. Same bat time, same bat channel. See you in a moment. Thank you very much.